In 1954, in a narrow kitchen in Davenport, Iowa, a woman named Ruth set her alarm for 5 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and church did not start until 10. She was not up early for the sermon, she was up early for supper. Before she put on her good dress, before she set the hat pin, before she got 4 children into shoes that matched, she had a heavy glass dish on the counter and a bowl of cold chicken beside it, and by the time that family walked out the front door, the dish was covered with a clean tea towel and waiting on the cool of the back porch for the preaching to end. That was the great secret of the whole decade, and nearly every woman in America knew it. You did the loving early, in the dark, before anyone was awake to thank you. Then you sat in the pew, and the oven finished what your hands had started. Today we are going back to that oven, and we are going to remember 25 forgotten casseroles that came out of it, the Sunday dishes that fed this country and then quietly went away. And I am saving the tenderest one for the very last, the pan that came out of the oven wearing a golden lid of biscuits, the one that made a whole family go quiet when it hit the table. Along the way, we will stop at number 17, the meatballs a child named at the supper table and the name stuck for 50 years, and number 15, the Friday night dish you could smell on every street in the neighborhood at the same hour. So pull your chair up close, and if you set that table, or sat at it, stay right here with me. Do subscribe and keep a seat with us, because here at Forgotten Flavors, we remember the flavors that time forgot. Number 25, cheeseburger pie. Now, I want to start us off easy, with the one that always made the children cheer, because there was a stretch of years in the 50s when an American mother could put a hamburger in a pie plate and be considered a genius, and honestly, she was. She browned a pound of ground beef with a chopped onion, drained it, salted and peppered it, and spread it out in a greased pie plate. Then came the trick, and it was a beautiful one. She beat up a thin batter of eggs and milk and flour, thin as cream, poured it right over that meat, and did not touch it again. In the oven, that batter sank down around the meat, and rose up around the edges, and made its very own crust, so a woman who did not have 20 minutes for a rolling pin and a floured board could still set a pie on her table. Cheese went over for the last 5 minutes, and it came out puffed and golden and sliced into wedges like a proper pie. This was weeknight food and young bride food, the first dish a new wife could make without calling her mother. Why did it go? Because the day came when a family could buy 4 hamburgers out a window in 4 minutes for less trouble than heating the oven, and a homemade cheeseburger stopped being a treat and started being an errand. But if the first one was clever, the next one was pure survival, and it took 2 hours and not 1 minute of watching. Number 24, 7-layer dinner. This one deserves a monument. A woman took her deepest dish and she started layering it raw, everything raw, in order. A bed of potatoes sliced thin as a dime, then onions, sliced just as thin, then a layer of rice, or celery if the rice was low, then carrots, then a whole pound of raw ground beef, crumbled out flat, then tomatoes and their juice, salt and pepper, and not much else, and last of all, strips of bacon laid across the top like ribbons on a package, lid on, into a slow oven for 2 hours. And here is the trick, the whole point of the dish. Nothing was browned, nothing was boiled first, not one pan was dirtied besides the one she baked in, because the meat's own fat ran down through the vegetables, and the tomato juice steamed the rice and the potatoes at the same time, and everything in that dish cooked everything else. A woman could put that together in 15 minutes at 8 in the morning and walk out the door to Sunday school, and it fed 6 people out of a pound of hamburger. It disappeared because 2 hours became an unaffordable length of time, and because it came out looking like nothing at all, brown and soft and humble, and we became a people who wanted our supper to look like a photograph. But the next one wore a fancier name, and the family knew better. Number 23, poor man's lasagna. Some called it mock lasagna, some just called it the noodle thing, and everybody's grandmother swore hers was the original. There were no long lasagna sheets in it, because those were a specialty item, and no ricotta either, because in most of America in 1955, you could not buy ricotta at the corner store to save your life. So she used what the store had: wide egg noodles, or even elbow macaroni, boiled and drained, ground beef browned with onion and garlic, and simmered down with canned tomatoes and a spoon of sugar to take the sharp edge off. And then the substitution that made the whole thing possible: cottage cheese, beaten smooth with an egg and a shake of pepper, spread between the noodle layers where the ricotta was supposed to be. Those cottage cheese layers baked up creamy and a little tangy and altogether wonderful, and children raised on it were downright disappointed the first time they ate the real thing in a restaurant. It came out on payday eve, Wednesdays, and on Sundays when company turned up unannounced, because it stretched to fill any pan you owned. It vanished for a sad reason. Real ricotta showed up in every grocery in America, and the imitation started to feel like an apology, and daughters quit making the dish their mothers were proud of. But the next pan had no apology in it at all. It was a church basement institution. Number 22, baked spaghetti. Not spaghetti in a bowl with sauce on top. Baked spaghetti is a different animal entirely, and if you grew up in Ohio or Tennessee or anywhere with a fellowship hall, you know exactly what I mean. The spaghetti was boiled just shy of done because it had more cooking to do, and it went into a long pan tossed with a meat sauce that had been on the back burner since after breakfast: ground beef and onion and green pepper and canned tomatoes and a bay leaf. Cheese was layered right down in the middle, not just scattered on top, and it baked covered a while and uncovered at the last, so the strands up top went crisp and chewy and a little burnt, and those were the part the children fought over. The grandmother's trick was patience of a kind we have lost. She made it the night before and let it sit in the icebox, because a pan of spaghetti that has slept in its sauce comes out tasting twice as deep, the noodles having spent all night drinking. It was Wednesday night church supper food, and school fundraiser food, and Sunday food, because it held its heat like a brick oven. It faded because Italian restaurants came to every town in America and taught us spaghetti was supposed to be twirled fresh, so a casserole of it started sounding like leftovers. It was never leftovers. It was better than the original. But the next dish smelled better than anything on this list, and it started with a skillet full of sausage. Number 21, sausage and rice bake. If you want to know what a farmhouse smelled like on a cold Sunday, it smelled like this: bulk pork sausage, the good kind with sage in it, broken up and browned in the black skillet until the edges caught. Then out came the sausage with a slotted spoon, and here is the trick that separates the grandmothers from the rest of us. All that rendered fat stayed in the pan, and into it went chopped onion and celery, and then the raw rice, and she stirred that rice in the hot fat 2 or 3 minutes until every grain turned pearly and toasted and smelled like nuts. That step did more for the dish than any amount of seasoning could, because the rice went into the oven already flavored clear through instead of just sitting in flavored liquid. Then it all went in the dish: sausage back on top, chicken broth over, sometimes slivered almonds for crunch, lid on, 1 hour, and it came out with every grain separate and glossy. It was cold weather food, hunting season food, and in a lot of churches it was breakfast, served between services on 150 paper plates. It went away when we all got frightened of pork fat, and when boxed rice mixes turned up promising the same thing in 7 minutes, which they did not deliver, not even close. But the next one has a name that half of you say and half of you have never heard in your life. Number 20. Hamburger hot dish. If you are from Minnesota, or the Dakotas, or northern Wisconsin, you just sat up, because in your family, it was never once called a casserole. It was a hot dish, one word, said quick, and it was not a recipe so much as a shape a supper took. A pound of hamburger browned with onion, a starch, which meant macaroni, or egg noodles, or in the truest versions, potatoes, a vegetable out of a can, corn or green beans or mixed, and a binder, either a milk gravy she stirred up herself out of flour and butter and drippings, or a can of condensed cream soup, which by 1955 was in every pantry in the upper Midwest and which nobody on this earth needs to feel guilty about. And then the crown, because a hot dish was judged on its top. Crushed crackers with butter, or potato rounds set out in rows, or fried onions, anything that would go crisp and brown while the underneath went soft. It came out after church, and for funerals, and in ice fishing season when the men needed something hot at odd hours, and it fed a table of 8 for the price of a pound of meat. It faded partly because the word itself became a joke to people who never ate one, and there was a stretch of years when a woman would rather serve you anything than admit she had made a hot dish. Well, shame on that. But the next dish only existed if you had done something else right first, on Sunday. Number 19. Beef and noodle bake. This one is the child of another meal, and that is the whole beauty of it. On Sunday, there had been a beef roast, a chuck roast most likely, browned hard and cooked low for hours with onions until it fell apart under a fork, and gravy made in that same pan from the drippings, and a spoon of flour. There was always meat left, and a grandmother would sooner have walked to town barefoot than waste it. So on Tuesday, the roast came back. She pulled the beef into shreds with 2 forks, boiled a pot of wide egg noodles, and folded them together with the gravy she had hidden in the icebox in a coffee cup with a saucer over it. Here is her trick, and it is worth writing down. She stirred a good spoonful of sour cream into that gravy off the heat, never over it, because sour cream that boils will break and curdle and shame you in front of your family. Off the heat, folded in gentle, it turned an ordinary brown gravy into something rich and tangy that tasted like it had cost money. Buttered breadcrumbs over the top, 30 minutes in the oven, and Tuesday was handled. Why is it gone? Because the Sunday roast is gone. There are no leftovers from a meal nobody cooks anymore, and a whole family of Tuesday dishes went into the ground with it. But the next pan came from a grandmother who was tired and who was not the least bit sorry about it. Number 18. Cabbage roll casserole. In the neighborhoods where the old country landed, in Cleveland and Pittsburgh and Chicago and Buffalo, cabbage rolls were a 2-day proposition. You boiled the whole head and peeled the leaves off one at a time as they went limp, burning your fingers, and you made the filling of ground meat and rice and onion, and then you rolled every single one by hand, tucking the ends, and lined them in the pot like sleeping children. 100 of them for a holiday. Beautiful, and murder on a pair of hands that had been working since 1912. So somewhere in the 50s, in 10,000 kitchens at once, grandmothers who could no longer hold a hot cabbage leaf did the sensible thing. They chopped the cabbage, they browned the meat with onion, stirred in the rice raw, spread the cabbage in the dish, the meat and rice over it, poured tomato and broth over the whole business, and put a lid on it. Lazy cabbage rolls, they called them, and the flavor was every bit the same, and everybody at the table knew it. Her extra trick was to cook the rice halfway in the same water the cabbage had been in, so nothing was thrown out, and everything tasted of everything else. It came out on Sundays, and through Lent, and after funerals. Why did it disappear? because the rolled version got itself into restaurants and got respected, and the chopped version was considered cheating, so nobody wrote it down. It was not cheating, it was wisdom, and it was mercy on an old woman's hands. But the next dish got its name from a child, and the name outlived everybody at the table. Number 17. Porcupine meatballs. Here is the one I promised you. A woman mixed her ground beef with chopped onion, salt, pepper, and egg, and then, instead of breadcrumbs, she worked in a half cup of raw white rice. Raw. She rolled the meatballs, set them in the dish, poured tomato juice thinned with water over them, covered it tight, and baked it a good hour. And in that hour, the rice swelled and pushed its way out of the meat, so every meatball came to the table bristling with little white quills, porcupines. And the story every family tells is that a child at the table looked into the dish and said the word, and that was that. The name was set for 3 generations. The trick was arithmetic. That half cup of raw rice stretched 1 pound of ground beef into supper for 6, and stretched it invisibly because the rice was inside the meat instead of sitting next to it on the plate, and children who would have complained about a rice night asked for the porcupines again next week. It was birthday food, and sick day food, and the food of the 3rd week of the month, when the meat money got thin. Why did it go? Because beef got cheap for a while, and nobody needed to stretch it, and a dish invented out of necessity feels silly when the necessity lifts. And then beef got dear again, and by then we had forgotten how. But the next one is a side dish that outshone the main course at every church supper it ever attended. Number 16. Escalloped corn. And yes, the old cookbooks spell it escalloped, with an E, and the old ladies said it that way too, and I am not going to correct them. Corn, cream style and whole kernel both if she had them, or cut fresh off the cob in August, beaten with eggs and milk and a little sugar and plenty of pepper, and then the thing that made it what it was, cracker crumbs. Soda crackers, a whole sleeve, tumbled into a clean tea towel, folded over, and rolled flat with the rolling pin, and half of those went into the batter, and half over the top, with butter dotted all over. That was the trick, and it did 2 jobs at once. The crumbs inside soaked up the milk and held the whole thing together, so it sliced instead of running, and the crumbs on top toasted golden and buttery and gave you something to bite. It came out set and steaming and went straight to the church supper, where it sat between the ham and the beans and got scraped down to the corners every single time. Thanksgiving, Christmas, any Sunday with corn in the pantry. Why is it gone? Because it got confused with its sweeter cousin, which we will come to later, and because when American tables got smaller, the side dishes were the first thing cut. Nobody makes 3 sides for 2 people. But the next dish was the one that got the whole neighborhood through Friday. Number 15, salmon loaf. Here is the other one I promised you, and if you were raised Catholic, or raised thrifty, or both, this is the smell of Friday evening in 1956. A tall can of pink salmon, and it cost next to nothing, and it came out of that can in one solid piece, with the skin on it, and the little round bones running through. And the grandmother's rule, said sharp to any grandchild who reached for the garbage can, was this: do not you dare throw those bones away. She mashed them right in with a fork until they disappeared entirely, because those soft little vertebrae were pure calcium, and she knew it long before anybody printed it on a label, and she was feeding growing children on a budget that did not include milk twice a day. Into the salmon went crushed crackers, an egg or 2, a splash of milk, grated onion, a squeeze of lemon if there was one, and it got packed into a loaf pan and baked until firm and the edges pulled away, and it was served, always, with a plain white sauce poured over, sometimes with chopped hard-boiled eggs stirred in, and a bowl of peas alongside. That was Friday. Whole streets ate it at the same hour, and you could smell it going house to house. It disappeared for a reason that is not the dish's fault. We became a country that will not tolerate a bone, and then fresh salmon arrived and changed what the word even means, and a humble baked loaf could not compete with a pink fillet. Now let me take you to Texas. Number 14, King Ranch Chicken. This one belongs to Texas the way barbecue does, and nobody has ever proved which ranch or which cook it came from, so it belongs to everybody. A stewing hen simmered with an onion until the meat fell off, and the broth saved, because the broth was half the dish. Corn tortillas torn by hand. Tomatoes and green chilies, canned, with all their liquid. A creamy sauce, sometimes a cooked-down mix of broth and flour and milk, sometimes the shortcut can. Grated cheese by the double handful. It all went into the pan in layers. Tortilla, chicken, chilies, sauce, cheese, and again, until it baked bubbling at the edges and blistered brown on top. Here is the trick, and every Texas grandmother had her own version. Fresh tortillas turned to paste in a casserole, so she either let them go stale on the counter overnight, or gave them a quick pass through hot oil, or dipped each one in warm broth for 1 second, no more, and that single step is the difference between layers you can see and a sad gray pudding. It was the dish for the Sunday when the pastor came, and it was the dish that went to any house where a baby had just arrived. It faded because Tex-Mex moved into restaurants, and the home version started feeling like a poor copy. It is not. It is the original. But the next dish shows up in every American cookbook printed between the wars, and hardly a kitchen since. Number 13, Ham and Potato au Gratin. We will come to scalloped potatoes and ham later, and these two are cousins, not twins. Au gratin meant cheese, sharp cheese, the orange kind that came in a rectangle wrapped in paper, grated on the same box grater she had used since her wedding. She made a real sauce, butter and flour cooked into a paste, then milk whisked in slow until it coated the spoon, then handfuls of that cheese stirred in off the heat with a little dry mustard, which was her secret, and is a good one, because dry mustard makes cheese taste more like itself. Potatoes sliced thin, ham cubed from whatever was left on the bone, layered up, sauce over each layer so no potato was left dry, buttered crumbs on top for the brown. Her trick was slicing those potatoes on the same little wooden slaw board she used for cabbage, thin enough to see light through, because thin potatoes cook in milk, and thick ones stay hard in the middle and ruin the whole pan. This was company food, Sunday food, the dish that came out when the aunts drove in from out of state. It disappeared the day the boxed version appeared with its foil packet of powder, because the box was faster, and a whole generation grew up thinking that dusty flavor was what au gratin meant. But the next one, the ladies of the Bridge Club would want me to mention, was pure elegance. Number 12, Chicken divan. This was the dish a woman made when she wanted you to know she had been somewhere. It came down to home kitchens from a New York hotel dining room, and the ladies' magazines carried it into every town in America. Broccoli, laid in the bottom of a buttered dish, which was itself a statement, because broccoli was still slightly exotic in a lot of the country and cost real money. Poached chicken breast sliced over it, and then the sauce, which was the whole performance, made properly with butter and flour and chicken broth and cream, finished with grated cheese, a spoonful of mayonnaise for body, and a small splash of sherry she kept in the back of a cupboard and used for nothing else her entire life. Cheese and crumbs over the top, then a hot oven just long enough to brown and no longer, and that was her trick. Everything in that dish was already cooked. It went in to brown and to marry, not to cook, and a woman who left it 20 minutes too long got gray broccoli and sad chicken and knew she had failed. She undercooked that broccoli deliberately, pulled it while it squeaked, so it would still be green at the table. Bridge Club, ladies' luncheon. The Sunday the minister and his wife came for dinner. It disappeared because it was aspirational, and aspirations move on, and because the sherry bottle went out of the American cupboard. But the next one is the dish an entire country learned from its grandmothers and then handed back. Number 11. Shepherd's pie. Let me say the honest thing first. If it is made with beef, and in America it nearly always was, the old name for it is cottage pie, and shepherd's pie proper is made with lamb. Every grandmother from the British Isles knew that, and called it shepherd's pie anyway. Ground beef browned with onion and carrot, a spoon of flour stirred in, then broth, until it made its own thick gravy, with peas stirred through at the end. That went into the dish, and over the top went the mashed potatoes, and here is where the whole thing was won or lost. The potatoes had to be stiff, not soupy, mashed with butter and just enough hot milk, because a loose potato sinks into the gravy and you get soup. She spread them clear to the edges, sealing them against the sides so the gravy could not bubble up around them, and then took a fork and raked the surface into rows of ridges, and that was not decoration. Those ridges were engineering. Every peak caught the heat and turned deep golden brown. Every valley stayed soft, so one spoonful gave you both. Monday was the day, because it was made of Sunday's leftovers, and it turned two tired things into a meal that felt brand new. It left the American home and moved into pubs and freezer cases. But number 10 was never leftovers. Number 10 was a holiday all by itself. The Sunday oven. Now let me stop and tell you why all of this happened at once, because it is not an accident that a whole nation started baking supper in one dish in the same 20 years. 3 things came together. The first was the oven. By the 1950s, nearly every American kitchen had a steady gas or electric range with a thermostat on the front, and that dial changed everything, because for the first time, an ordinary woman could set a temperature and walk away from it. Her mother had cooked on a wood stove that had to be fed and read and argued with all day. She had a dial. The second was the dish. Cheap, heavy glass baking dishes came into the stores by the millions, and they went from oven to table to icebox and back, and a woman could carry one to a church supper and get it home with her name still taped to the bottom. And the third was the way we lived. Sunday meant church, and church meant 3 hours out of the house, right through the middle of the day, and yet Sunday dinner was the biggest meal of the week, and no woman was going to serve sandwiches on the Lord's Day. The casserole solved it, assembled before dawn, all in one dish, cooked while she was in a pew singing. And when the church needed to feed 200 people, or a mother was in the hospital, or somebody had died, that same dish was already the answer, because it traveled, and it held its heat, and it needed nothing but a fork. We did not lose the casserole because it was bad. We lost it because we lost the Sunday it was built for. But let us get back to the table, because number 10 is one people still weep over. Number 10, corn pudding, not the escalloped corn with its cracker crumbs. This is the other one, the smooth one, really a custard wearing a vegetable's name, and in some families it was more sacred than the turkey. Corn, and in the best versions fresh corn in season, cut off the cob, and then, here is a trick worth 1,000 words, the cob scraped hard with the back of the knife to press out all that starchy sweet corn milk, which is where nearly all the flavor lives, and which most people throw away. That milk went in the bowl. Then eggs well beaten, milk and cream, a spoon of sugar, a spoon of flour, salt, butter, and that was all. It went into a buttered dish, and then the second trick, which grandmothers did without thinking. That dish was set inside a bigger pan with hot water poured halfway up the sides, so the custard cooked in gentle steam instead of hard dry heat, and came out silky instead of curdled and weeping. And she pulled it while the center still trembled when you nudged the pan, because a corn pudding finishes cooking on the counter, and one that looks perfectly set in the oven is ruined by the time it is served. Thanksgiving, Christmas, and in August when the corn came in, made anyway in a kitchen too hot to breathe in, because it was worth it. It disappeared because it wants an hour of oven and a careful eye, and because the sweet, dense, stir-and-bake version pushed the delicate one right off the table. But the next dish was the fanciest thing most families ever ate at home. Number 9, chicken a la king over toast. Say it out loud and you can hear the era. This was Sunday supper, and that phrase needs explaining because we do not live that way now. On Sundays, the big meal came at 1 o'clock, straight home from church, and then in the evening, there was a light supper, something creamy served on toast, and this was the queen of them. It started with a stewing hen, an old bird that had quit laying, simmered slow all morning with an onion and a bay leaf, and the broth from that hen was liquid gold. The sauce was built on it, butter and flour and broth and cream cooked until velvety, and into it went the diced chicken, mushrooms sautéed in butter, chopped green pepper for the bite, and the touch that made it a party, pimiento, cut in little red strips out of a small jar. That was the trick, and it was pure showmanship. Those red flecks against the pale sauce made a plain dish look festive, and a grandmother knew that food you eat with your eyes first tastes better. Most ladled it steaming over triangles of buttered toast, points up. It was wedding reception food, church luncheon food, and Sunday night food for 50 years. It disappeared because sometime in the 70s, the word creamed turned into an insult, and every white sauce in America was declared old-fashioned in the space of about 5 years. That was a mistake, and we are still paying for it. The table that got quieter. Let me say something here, in the middle, to those of you sitting with a cup of coffee watching this by yourselves. I know a great many of you learned every dish in this hour at a table with 8 chairs pulled up to it, and a lot of those chairs are empty now. Maybe the children are grown and scattered across 3 states. Maybe the person you cooked for the longest is not at the table anymore, and you have gotten out of the habit of cooking at all, because it feels foolish to make a whole pan for one. It is not foolish. It never was. A casserole is the kindest thing in the world to cook for one person, and the women who invented these dishes would tell you the same. You make the whole pan, because a half pan bakes strange. You eat it hot the first night. You cut the rest into squares, wrap them separate, and freeze them, and you have given yourself 6 suppers that need an oven and 20 minutes, on the nights when you have not got 1 ounce of energy left. And then, and this is the part I am going to ask of you, put it on a real plate. Sit down at the table, not on the couch. Use the good dishes, because you have been saving them for company for 30 years and, my friend, you are company. There is nothing sad in cooking for yourself. It is one of the last honest ways a person can say, I am still worth the trouble. Now, number 8, and the church basement gets involved again. Number 8, macaroni and cheese, baked in the oven. And I have to be careful with the words, because we have all eaten something called macaroni and cheese this year, and most of it has nothing to do with what I am describing. The real one, the Sunday one, was a baked custard dish, firm enough to cut in squares and lift out with a spatula, standing up on the plate. She boiled her elbow macaroni just barely, and then she layered it, and she did not stir. Macaroni in the buttered dish, then a thick layer of sharp cheese grated off the block, dots of butter, salt, pepper, then more macaroni, more cheese, up to the top. Then she beat eggs into milk with a spoon of dry mustard and poured it over until it came just below the surface, and let it sit 10 minutes to soak down. Crumbs on top, and a moderate oven for the better part of an hour until it puffed and browned and set. That layering was the trick. Stirred macaroni and cheese goes greasy and separates. Layered and custard-bound, it holds together in slices, with crisp brown edges and pockets of pure melted cheese down inside. It was Sunday dinner, and it was the main dish on a meatless Friday, and it was on every funeral table in the South. It disappeared because a box promised the same words in 7 minutes, and because we decided that macaroni and cheese should be pourable. The old one was better, and it was cheaper too, but the next dish cannot even be picked up with a fork, and that is the entire point of it. Number 7. Spoon bread. If your people were from Virginia, or Kentucky, or the Carolinas, you may have already gotten quiet, because spoon bread is not really a bread at all. It is the softest, most delicate thing an American kitchen ever made out of nothing but cornmeal, and it is served with a spoon, hence the name, right out of the dish onto the plate, in a steaming pale cloud with butter melting into it. She started by scalding the cornmeal. Hot milk poured over it in the pan, stirred hard until it thickened into smooth mush, and that step is not optional. Cornmeal that has not been cooked first turns gritty, and grit is the death of spoon bread. Off the heat, in went butter and salt, and the egg yolks beaten in one at a time. And then the trick of tricks, the one that separates a good spoon bread from a magnificent one. She beat the egg whites separately in a bowl until they stood in soft peaks, and folded them into the batter last, gentle as handling a bird, and that air is what made the whole dish rise up like a soufflé in the oven, and quiver when you carried it. It went in a hot buttered dish, and it went to the table the instant it came out, because a spoon bread starts falling from the minute it leaves the heat, and a family who dawdled got a flat one and deserved it. Sunday dinner with country ham and gravy. Christmas morning. Why is it gone? Because almost nobody keeps cornmeal in the house now, and because it demands to be eaten immediately, and we have become a people who eat when we get around to it. But the next one is the dish that told you Easter had come and gone. Number 6. Scalloped potatoes and ham. Now here is the cousin I promised you, and there is no cheese in this one, not a shred, and if your grandmother caught you putting cheese in her scalloped potatoes, she would have had words. This was the dish of the week after the holiday. Easter Sunday there had been a great glazed ham on the table, and Christmas the same, and by Tuesday what remained was the bone and the scraps clinging to it, and the odd end pieces too ragged to serve to company, and that was exactly what this dish was built for. Potatoes peeled and sliced thin, onions sliced thin with them, and then the trick, and it is the prettiest shortcut in this whole hour. She did not make a sauce. She built the dish dry, a layer of potatoes, then a scattering of the ham pieces, then a light dusting of flour shaken over from her fingers, salt, pepper, a few dots of butter, and she did that 3 or 4 times up the dish. Then she poured plain milk over the whole thing until it came up to the top layer, and put it in the oven, and let the oven do the work, because that flour and that milk and the starch coming out of the potatoes made their own cream sauce right there in the pan, thick and gently sweet and tasting of ham. 2 hours, covered most of the way, uncovered at the end for the brown. No extra pot, no whisk, nothing to wash. It disappeared because families quit buying a big bone-in ham, and a dish designed to rescue leftovers cannot survive without them. But the next one is the only casserole on this list that never went away at all, and there is a reason for that. Number 5. The green bean bake. Now some of you are already smiling because you know this one, and you will eat it again in November. And I want to talk about it honestly, because it has been sneered at by people who ought to know better, and it deserves defending. Green beans, and in the early days they were beans out of the family's own canning jars from the garden. A creamy mushroom sauce, which a woman either made herself with butter and flour and milk and a handful of mushrooms, or poured out of a can of condensed soup, and by 1955 most of America chose the can, and did so cheerfully and without one moment of guilt, and I will not sit here and second-guess a woman who was feeding 9 people. A splash of milk, pepper, sometimes a dash of soy sauce, which was the one strange ingredient nobody could explain and everybody used, and on top, crisp fried onions, and the trick with those, the one thing that separates a good pan from a soggy one, is that only half go in the mixture and the rest go on in the last 10 minutes, so they stay crackling instead of going limp. It was invented as an everyday side dish, and then a strange thing happened. It walked onto the Thanksgiving table and refused to leave, and now it appears on tens of millions of American tables one day a year and almost never on the other 364, so it did not disappear. It got promoted, all the way up to being the smell that means the whole family is finally in the house, the ants in the kitchen, the coats piled on the bed, the good tablecloth out. That is not a joke dish. That is a landmark. But number 4 was the smell of the best morning of the year. Number 4, pineapple ham bake. Close your eyes for this one, because this is Easter Sunday, and it is Christmas Day, and in a lot of houses it was the only time all year the whole family was in one room. A ham, cut in thick slices or cubed, laid in the big dish, and sometimes on a bed of sweet potatoes underneath, which is how they did it in the South. Rings of pineapple out of a can laid over the top, edge to edge, and a maraschino cherry pressed into the hole in the center of every single ring, which was a child's job and a serious honor. Brown sugar packed over the whole surface. Whole cloves stuck into the ham in a pattern, and the children counted them and were told firmly not to eat one, and every child in America ate one anyway, exactly once, and never made that mistake again. And here is the grandmother's trick. She did not buy anything to glaze it with. She poured the juice right out of the pineapple can over the brown sugar, and that juice, and that sugar, and the ham's own salt cooked down together in the oven into a dark, sticky, shining glaze, sweet and sharp at once, that she spooned back over the top 3 or 4 times while it baked. Nothing bought, nothing wasted. That was a woman who could make a holiday out of a can and a ham. It faded because we decided sweet and savory should not touch, and because a canned pineapple ring became a symbol of a decade people wanted to laugh at. Let them laugh. It was glorious. But the next one is the dish this whole country loves to mock, and it is time somebody stood up for it. Number 3, tuna noodle. There it is. The most laughed at casserole in American history, and I would like to say something in its defense, because millions of us were raised on it, and we turned out just fine. Egg noodles, boiled and drained, a can of tuna, flaked with a fork, a cup of peas, frozen or canned, a cream sauce, made from scratch with butter and flour and milk on the good weeks, poured out of a can of condensed soup on the tired ones, chopped onion and celery for crunch, a little grated cheese if there was any, and on top went crushed potato chips, and if there were no chips, crushed crackers, and if there were no crackers, torn bread with butter, because a woman found something to make a crust with. Her real trick was one nobody talks about. She held back a half cup of milk and never put it in the first day, because she knew there would be leftovers, and she knew a noodle casserole drinks up every drop of sauce overnight, and that reserved milk stirred in the second day brought the whole pan right back to life. Friday nights, Lent, the night the mother of the house worked a shift and the oldest girl got supper on. And the reason it disappeared is not that it was bad. It disappeared because it became a punchline, because somewhere along the way, this country decided that the honest food of the people who raised us was funny, and a lot of good women quietly stopped making a dish their families loved because they had been made to feel small about it. That was our loss, not theirs. But the next one has no jokes in it at all. Number 2, funeral potatoes. Every part of this country has its own name for it. Funeral potatoes, cheesy potatoes, church potatoes, party potatoes, for a family that wanted a happier word. But everybody knows what it is, and when it shows up. Potatoes, shredded or cut in cubes, and grandmothers baked and cooled their own the day before so they would not go watery. Sour cream and a creamy soup or a milk sauce stirred together with grated sharp cheese, chopped onion, salt and pepper, and melted butter, all folded through the potatoes and pressed into the pan. And over the top, crushed cereal flakes tossed in more melted butter, or crushed crackers, or crushed potato chips, whatever the pantry gave, and it baked until the edges bubbled and the top went deep gold and shattered under a serving spoon. But the trick of this dish is not in the ingredients. The trick is that it was built to travel. It could be assembled the night before and left in the icebox, ride in the back of a car for 20 miles, sit on a counter an hour, and come back to life in a warm oven, and feed 25 people out of one pan for almost no money. And that is why, in 1,000 towns, when the news came that somebody's husband had died, the women of that street did not knock on the door and ask what they could do. They went home, and they made this, and they wrote their name on a strip of tape on the bottom of the dish, and they carried it over and set it on the counter and hugged the widow and left without staying too long. That is the whole dish. It is what people cooked when there were no words. It has not really disappeared, thank God, because grief has not disappeared either. But we have gotten shy about it. We send a card now, we order something delivered, and there is not one thing on this earth that says I am with you like a warm pan carried up a front walk by a neighbor in her good coat. But there is one more, and it is the one I have been holding all hour. And number 1, chicken and biscuit bake. This is the one. This is the pan that comes back to people in dreams. The one that grown men in their 70s get quiet about, and I want to tell it slow, the way it deserves. It started on Saturday, with a hen, not a young friar from a store, but an old laying hen who had done her work and quit, and a farm wife thanked her for it and put her in the biggest pot she owned, with an onion, a couple of carrots, a stalk of celery, a bay leaf, and cold water over the top. And that pot sat and murmured on the back of the stove for 3 or 4 hours, doing almost nothing, filling the whole house with the finest smell in the American language. She pulled the hen out and let it cool and picked every scrap of meat off those bones with her fingers, and she strained that broth and set it in the cold, and the next morning there was a cap of golden fat on top of it, and she saved that too, because that fat went into the biscuits. Sunday morning, before church, she made her gravy from that broth, butter and flour cooked pale, the broth whisked in hot, a little milk at the end, salt and a heavy hand with the black pepper, and it went into the dish with the chicken and whatever the garden had given her, peas, carrots, a handful of little onions. And she covered it and left it, and then she went to church. And here is the trick, the one thing that made this dish what it was, and if you take nothing else from this whole hour, take this. The biscuits do not go on at the beginning. When the family came home from church, she lit the oven and got that pan of chicken and gravy bubbling hot first, really bubbling, and only then did she make her biscuit dough, soft dough, mixed by feel with buttermilk and that saved chicken fat, and she dropped it in spoonfuls right on top of the boiling gravy and slid it back in for 20 minutes. And what happens in those 20 minutes is the whole reason this dish exists. The bottoms of those biscuits sit down in the hot gravy and drink it, and go soft and rich and savory like dumplings, and the tops stay up in the dry heat of the oven and go tall and golden and crisp. One biscuit, two different things, gravy underneath and gold on top. You cannot buy that. There is no shortcut to it. It only happens because a woman was paying attention, and then she carried it to the table with a folded towel in each hand and set it down in the middle, and everybody stopped talking. That is the part people remember, not the recipe, the stopping, the steam coming up off the pan and hitting the light from the window, and a grandmother standing there with her apron still on, telling everybody to sit down before it got cold, and refusing to sit herself until every last plate was filled. And when it was finally her turn, she took the smallest piece, the corner one, and she said she liked the corner best, and every one of us believed her for about 30 years. Why did this one disappear? 100 reasons and one. Nobody stews a hen for 4 hours. Nobody has a Saturday like that. Biscuit dough by feel is a skill that lives in a pair of hands and dies with them if nobody stands at the counter and watches. But the truest reason is this: nobody ever wrote it down. It was too ordinary to write down, they thought. It was just what we have on Sunday, and so it went, quiet as anything, along with the hen and the apron and the woman who made it, and there are people watching me right now who would give absolutely anything, anything at all, for one more plate of it at that table with those people. That's the pan that takes you back. That's the flavor that time forgot. And let us be honest with each other before we go, because it would be easy to end this soft, and the truth is better. These 25 dishes did not fail. They were not bad cooking, and they were not poor people's food to be pitied, and I will not have them talked about that way. They were engineering. They were a woman working out how to feed 8 human beings on 1 pound of meat 3 hours before she could get back to a stove. There is more real skill in a scalloped potato that makes its own sauce than in half of what gets photographed today. What happened is that the world those dishes fit into came apart. Sunday stopped being 3 hours in a pew and the whole afternoon at a table. Everybody in the house got a job and a schedule and a different supper time. Somebody invented a window you could drive up to. And a nation that had fed itself out of one dish in one oven for 20 years quietly quit and never once had a conversation about what it was giving up. So here is what I would ask of you, and it is not much. This week, pick one, any one of them, whichever name made you sit up straight when I said it. Make it, even if it is only for you, even if the pan is too big and you eat squares of it Thursday and Friday too. Put it on a real plate. Sit down at the table like it matters, because it does. And if there is a name that came to you while we sat here, a mother, a grandmother, an aunt with flour on her wrists, say that name out loud in your own kitchen while the oven is on. That is how they stay, not in a cookbook, in a hot pan, in a warm room, on an ordinary evening, remembered. Thank you for spending this hour at the Sunday table with me. If something in it brought a face back to you, I hope you will subscribe and stay close, and please tell me in the comments which one your family made and what she called it, because every family had its own name for these things and I want to hear yours. Your stories are the better half of this channel, and I read every one. Next time, we are opening the icebox door and going after the desserts, the 25 forgotten American sweets that cooled on windowsills and got carried to picnics in a dish towel, the icebox cakes and the puddings and the pies that never needed an oven at all, including one so beloved that families fought over the recipe in wills. Until then, take good care of yourself, sit down when you eat, and remember, here we remember the flavors that time forgot. We will see you next time.